So, welcome back to the Green Room, where we review the week in cannabis. I'm Martin Lane, the co-founder of Cannabis, and joining me is Cannabis editor at large, Rhys Cohen. Rhys, it's been a while. What have you been up to?
Hey, not much. Like I don't move far. I live and work at my home. So you know where I am. If you need me, you can always come knocking.
There was me thinking that you lead this incredibly exciting life while you're not with
Thrilling.
me.
Tremendously thrilling. Yeah, no, this is the highlight of my week. Always is.
Well, it's
No,
good.
I've been good. I've been busy. Yeah, lots of stuff going on. Just juggling. You know how it goes.
The
Yeah.
usual. Oh well, that's good to hear. Good to be busy. And on with that, on that topic rather. Let's talk about the flower shortage. Now,
Sure.
after you wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, we had quite a few calls from cannabis companies claiming they had plenty of flower, but also lots of feedback from patients saying their supply had been interrupted. So
Yeah.
what's going on?
Yeah. Well, it seems pretty sectorial, I guess, or like it's interesting, right? So normally you would assume that if several, very frequently prescribed flower products suddenly became unavailable, that doctors would be able to easily find alternatives and swap patients over. Of course, it's not as easy as that for a whole number of reasons. But what was particularly concerning to me is to see some comments on some of the social media platforms by patients, even as recently as yesterday, saying, "Oh no, my doctor has told me that they're not writing any more flower prescriptions because there's none available." Now, yeah, okay, the many flower products are out of stock. That's true, but there are some alternatives, and there's more stuff sort of coming down the pipeline. So it just raises some red flags to me that either some of these clinic doctors in particular are somehow unaware of what's going on in the market and are uninformed about alternative products they could consider, or for one reason or another, they're choosing not to prescribe products from certain companies, even though patients need that medicine and they're asking for it. I mean, I'm not sure that that's happening, but that's one possible option, which is a bit concerning.
No, I was going to say to you, is it a supply issue or is it a demand issue? Because obviously we had that spike in February in terms of the number of prescriptions. So yeah,
It's a demand
which is
issue. I
it?
think the
Right,
consensus seems to be it's a demand
right.
issue primarily. I mean, demand and supply are integrally linked. But there wasn't some huge, to my knowledge anyway, some huge interruption or hiccup with the supply. It was just the lag time it takes to pick up on the fact that a trend is happening in a particular product SKU, catching people off guard, and everyone's sort of playing catch up.
Yeah, that was my next question actually, because I think our chief correspondent Steve Jones spoke to Tommy Huppert this week, and Tommy was kind of saying this could happen again because if there are issues with supply, but also if demand continues to grow in the way that it has done recently. I mean, I guess you put that potentially in the bucket of nice problem to have, wouldn't you?
Not really, because I don't think that's. I mean, obviously, it's not good for patients. It's also not good for product companies because it harms the confidence that doctors and patients have in that company's ability to provide continuous supply. And I think what people tend to forget about medicinal cannabis in Australia is that it's unacceptable for any Australian to be without the medicine that they are legally prescribed ever. And continuity of supply is a fundamental ethical requirement and imposition on every drug company. Now, of course, cannabis is different and it's more challenging for a whole number of reasons, but it's not, people talking like, oh, you can just, swap from this one to the other, like, that's fine. Give it a few weeks, give it a few months. Like, that's not how I would want anyone to be talking about the interruption in supply of any other medicine in Australia. But for some reason, we it's kind of like okay with cannabis. But I think Tommy's right. Like, this is going to happen again at some point, probably, differently to how it is at the moment, maybe. And large scale local production is one of the things that we can do to limit the extent to which that happens. But, we're still a ways away from that. But also on that note, congratulations to Cannatrek, second company to bring an Australian cultivated flower product to market. That's quite an achievement.
Yeah, and interesting actually. The other person I spoke to last week was Shane Duncan at Can Group, and he was saying, yeah, one of their concerns was that this might, you know, push people down a path we don't want them to go because they can't get their prescribed medicine. So it did feel a little bit like when we broke the story that the industry were kind of concerned about the perceptions and the realities that was, you know, that meant for patients, and kind of seem to sort of rally around a little bit and think, actually, this isn't a good look. What can we do about this to help? Which I thought was quite encouraging.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, people take this seriously. I'm not saying that product companies don't take it seriously or aren't doing everything that they can. But yeah, it isn't as easy as, or as simple as, or as harmless as, oh, that's okay, wait a few weeks, or, you know, change your medication, you know, ad hoc.
Yeah,
that's not a solution.
And is this might be really unfair, so shoot me down, as I'm sure you will, but is this partly a product of, you know, are these growing pains in a way, in the sense that, you know, it's now an industry that has to think in advance in terms of what kind of demand might be coming down the pipe, because for so long demand was growing but not that fast, and, you know, is it just a question of actually having to now forecast a bit more accurately and maybe a bit further forward?
Totally, yeah. And, you know, demand has been growing, but demand for flower hasn't been growing that quickly historically. Like the general sort of, you know, the rule of thumb in Australia has always been, oh, this is an oil market, really. You know, we have such strict doctor gatekeeping, and, you know, doctors will always prefer to prescribe oil product. And that, you know, that was sort of like a truism for a while, that we've been disabused of that notion. And, you know, product shortages and interruptions in other medicines as well. Like, this isn't an unheard of occurrence. But I feel that medicine interruptions in other prescription medicines are taken more seriously and are understood to be more, the impact of that on patients is better appreciated than with medicinal cannabis.
Okay, but that might change now that we've had this kind of, you know, this might be a bit of a kind of wake-up call potentially.
Maybe, but
Come on,
I don't think many medicinal cannabis companies. I don't think you're trying to be optimistic. I don't think many medicinal cannabis companies think like pharmaceutical companies do. So I remember, and maybe this isn't very fair, but like, yeah, going back a couple of years or whatever, right? You know, so product companies committing themselves to supply clinical trials for very serious conditions, which is a really serious commitment on behalf of the company. And then, whoops, sorry, head office hasn't signed off on the extra consignment. So, like, patients in clinical trials are going to have to, you know, like, things like that do happen and have happened in Australia with medicinal cannabis companies, usually ones that are headquartered overseas. So that, yeah, that's why I've developed this impression, but hopefully we are moving away from it.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there, because I think that's as good as it's going to get from Reece.
Yeah.
But actually, moving straight on to another topic where patients may feel a bit let down. So New Zealand has delayed its new medicinal cannabis framework for a second time, citing COVID-19 and a lack of suitable approved products. Which came a week after Tilray, of course, became the first company to have products verified as meeting the minimum quality standards under the new system. Similar question, really. Is this a case of unforeseen circumstances, or did the government just not think it through?
Bit of both, really, isn't it? Although I would say this is good news for patients, that many patients are probably quite happy with, because you can imagine, you know, you've got this looming deadline coming up, and you know that, no, you know, it's 2 seconds before midnight, right, yeah, and there's 2 products that will be available for you, and they're both CBD products. What am I going to do? So I think people are probably breathing a sigh of relief at the moment. I don't really know why. I mean, Warren Everett from MediPharm Labs was commenting on my LinkedIn post, basically saying, well, actually, and as well as some New Zealand commentators like Shane LeBrun, saying things like, guys, like, we've had products applications in for months. The government has been slow to assess them. This is the first time they're doing it. So, but you know, clearly they haven't been given the resources that they require to do things speedily, if that rings any bells to anybody. You know, it's deja vu all over again. And pick up your socks, you know, like, you put in place the framework, you design it, you set the rules, you set the timeline, you set the deadline. Stop kicking the can down the road and pull your finger out, I think is the message that many product companies are probably sending to the New Zealand regulators right now.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, this isn't companies dragging their feet. This is the government not actually being able to plow through the approvals quickly enough.
It seems that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, there might be, I think Shane was saying there's, several dozen products that are in the queue waiting to be assessed. I don't know the extent to which those applications are complete and accurate. It sounds very similar to what was happening in Australia with the ODC in the early days, where you had a combination of gross underfunding of the regulator, who were completely incapable of fulfilling their regulatory obligations, as well as a tidal wave of junk applications that needed to be waded through. I don't know that that's happening in New Zealand. You have to assume that at least some of these product applications are time wasters.
And you say, take your point, absolutely. It's good news in the sense that the deadline's pushed back, that people aren't going to suddenly find themselves without their medicine. But what if you were a betting man, what do you think the chances of the new, I think October the 31st deadline, I think
end of September,
the 30th deadline is going to be stuck to?
Pretty good, I guess. I mean, we've had at least a couple of products successfully run the gauntlet so far. So it seems like there is some movement, and 6 months is a long run up, especially if there's dozens of applications in the queue. So yeah, I'd be cautiously optimistic.
Cautiously optimistic is as good as it gets with you. So I'm going to take that.
Usually.
Swiftly move on. Now, in other news, Cannabis launched our Women in Cannabis initiative last week. Last week. As we record this, it's this week. But by the time this goes out, it will be last week.
Time travel.
And we profiled Astrid Dispensary, founder and managing director Lisa Newen. The idea is we want to kind of shine a spotlight on the women kind of making Australia, I would argue, one of the world's most gender diverse legal cannabis industries. So who better to talk about diversity than two white blokes? I have to say, go on, sorry.
Constant problem. No, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I got to say, as you know, I most recently came from the media and marketing industry, and I got to say that cannabis puts those advertising types to shame, really, when it comes to certainly filling kind of senior leadership positions with women. I remember we decided a while back that all of our panels at all of our conferences were going to be 50-50 gender split. And it's actually really difficult to do that in the media and marketing industry, just simply because there aren't enough women in senior positions to have a balanced panel. You don't want to be in a situation where you've got a couple of male CEOs and then you've got women who don't hold similar roles. So it was difficult to achieve, and we had to be quite kind of creative how we did it. Doesn't feel like that's an issue here, and certainly the US seems pretty forward thinking as well. But yeah, I just wondered if you had any kind of sort of read on that, really.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not very familiar with the States. I know in Canada, although cannabis companies have lots of women in them, at the very top of the hierarchy, it's pretty male dominated, I think it would be fair to say. And that's probably true of, it's true of most industries, unfortunately, or many industries, unfortunately. I love that about the Australian cannabis industry, that you are less at risk of being on a mantle than you would be in, some other part of the world. But it's still a challenge. Like, it's still a bit of a,
I love that. Mantle. I've never heard that.
You haven't heard that before?
No, that's good. I like that. It's a new one on me. A mantle. A male-dominated panel.
Right. Yeah. Like this one right here. Although
is that is that a portmanteau? Is that called a portmanteau? I think it might be.
I have no idea what that means.
I think
is that a language term?
It's when you conflate two words to create a new word, I believe.
Let's say it is. It's definitely one of those.
An example would be Brangelina.
Got you. Okay.
Do you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
know? Do you know who
I am personally familiar with Brangelina. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I did
Okay.
grow up in the
Yes.
'90s, so I didn't miss that one, unfortunately. Um, but it's interesting. Like as my friend Renee Lister used to be fond of saying, medicinal cannabis is to a large extent a woman's movement. Like I think especially in the minds of Australians, medicinal cannabis is often very closely tied with mothers and children. And that story about mothers and children is one of the reasons why we have a legal medicinal cannabis industry in Australia. And so, yeah, women are essential and to the progress that we've made. I would like that to. I would like more women to be present at these sorts of things. I do feel like we're still not close enough yet for my sort of liking, especially in the sort of public commentary stuff. Like, I mean, cannabis is great in my opinion, but I'm biased, But it's largely, you, me, and Jonesy, often speaking, and other than us, the most of the other sort of media commentary, industry analysis people out there are usually men as well. So I think that's one sector that we could, I don't know, work on somehow.
Yeah, it's a
Figure
fair
that one
point.
out.
It's a fair point. Yeah, and a couple of points. Yeah, that's a very interesting point you make about how the kind of medicinal cannabis industry has grown, and you think about people like Lucy Haslam and others who have kind of driven change. And some of the medical conditions, things like endometriosis, etc. And also, I guess you've got, there are some startups that have been started up, by women. You think about LeafCan and Elisabetta, and then you've got, female CEOs like Jo Patterson and Fleeta Solomon. So, as I say, I agree with you 100%. We can and should do better. But if I compare it to other industries I've been involved in, I think it's a pretty good starting place.
Great. That's good to hear. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have much context, I guess. It's also interesting, I think, maybe like because of the way in which we did medicinal cannabis, which is very different to how it happened in the States and Canada. Like I feel like their industries, to broadly paint them in, with one brush, came from or were more closely aligned or affiliated with the sort of cannabis subculture. And that's where a large part of that movement stems from. And that is a very masculine, broy, can be very broy, very male dominated sort of field. But like in Australia, I think because our approach for better or worse was so not that, like it was so strictly medicinal and, within, very much within the box, the TGA box. We haven't yet seen that part of the community come along for the ride, I guess. So the medicinal cannabis sector here feels like it has less of that broy, all I want to do is like, punch cones and do dabs kind of culture than you see in some other parts of the world. And maybe that's part of the reason.
Yeah, and look, I'll tell you what, it's a really fair point you make as well, that, we in terms of cannabis, it tends to be male voices more than female voices. And I think one of the things we want to try and do with women in cannabis is actually, profile some of the, women in the industry who are really making a difference, but also, encourage people to get involved in terms of, writing guest columns and those sorts of things, so we can sort of balance out the voice. Because I think it's a fair point you make, and I'm sometimes quite conscious of the homepage looking, very much very, very male dominated. So yeah, anything that we can do to get kind of more female voices into cannabis, I think I agree should be encouraged. Okay. Last up, I just want to chat about the MCIA's A Cannabis Evolve virtual conference next week, which is, I think, Tuesday and Wednesday. I know you're moderating a few sessions. I'm moderating a session. What are you looking forward to the most?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it's going to be interesting because quite a bit of my content has been pre-recorded. So I'm not really looking forward to that because I've already sort of done it, so to speak. But it will be interesting, and it had some really great chats. I'm keen to. I'm looking forward to. I mean, I love all my children equally, so I don't play favorites. But I am looking forward to chatting with Ian Alexander from Altum Group about Asia Pacific and sort of what's going on with cannabis in APAC, because it's something that's so close to home, like physically and culturally, but it's a bit of a blind spot for me personally. And I know, there hasn't been a lot of progress in many countries, but there's probably some really interesting stuff going on. So I'm looking forward to learning from Ian about that. Yeah. And what about you?
It's interesting you say that, actually, because yes, like you, I've pre-recorded a conversation with Cam Batley, who's MD of MedRelief Australia, for those who don't know, but also ex-Aurora, Canopy Growth, Bedrocan, sort of somebody who's been involved in the Canadian medicinal cannabis industry since its inception, really. And I chatted to him about kind of the global opportunities and where Australia could play and take advantage of those global opportunities, which was, it was a really interesting conversation, actually. And, he was very positive about where Australia is at currently and plenty of upside, but a few cautionary tales along the way. So, it was good conversation. And, I'm sure we'll get some good questions because, obviously that's the bit that we don't have yet is what the audience thinks. So I'm sure we'll find out. Okay.
It's going to be fun.
Yes, sorry, go on. I interrupted you.
No.
Okay, well, I'll go.
Taking a deep breath.
I'll go straight to the plug then. So there's still time to buy tickets, and Cannabis members even get a 20% discount. So just, I'll put the link actually in the blurb for this week's Green Room, so you can see how you can go about taking advantage of that offer. Okay, I think that's
it's all virtual, isn't it? It's all online.
It's all 100% virtual. Yes, so you can watch from wherever you are. Okay, I think that's about all we've got time for. What does the rest of your day look like?
I got to sit down and do some reading. I'm a full-time master's student now, and I got deadlines to meet. So I'm gonna crack the books and refresh my mind about the theoretical approaches to cannabis legalization.
Yes, and you were telling me over lunch last week that you've now turned into a proper journalist in that you leave absolutely everything to the last minute. So I'm glad. I'm glad in some small way we've been able to help you in your studies by doing that. All right, okay, we'll leave it there.
As my dad would say, with enough stress and coffee, you can get anything done.
That's very true. That's very true. Well, look, we better let you get on with it. So thanks for chatting, and I'll see you next week.
See you soon.
Cheers, bye.